First off, I'd like to thank all of our community partners. This has been just such a great statewide effort. We're so proud of this. We concluded our first week of activities, and I can say that so many partners have come to offer such great expertise. And again, we thank you so much for that. So this is our Small Business Bootcamp and Resource Collective. This is the office hour portion. We've designed our content for employees of 20 and under, although all companies can join our program. This is statewide with our community partners. Again, we're going to be running daily boot camps. We'll kick off again after our office hours on Monday with 3 great new topics. We'll get to show you a little bit. So next Monday, we're doing alternative funding sources. We had a really great session around starting up a relationship with your bank as well as alternative funding sources. We're going to continue on that. We will always review PPP, EIDL, and other federal government and other programs, but the main focus will be alternatives on Monday. On Tuesday, we're going to discuss negotiating relief, working with landlords, utility providers, and our concept here is cost reductions and also cost controls, and looking at that. And then we'll move right into Wednesday in a full-blown cut costs and manage cash, and giving some ideas from experts around that. So we're awfully excited about that. And again, just a reminder, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday are going to be our new topics, and Thursday and Friday are open office hours for Q&A. Thank you. As we said here, so we'll have our guidance from our coaches. Today we've got some really, really great panelists again. Bennett Brown, Carrie Ann Todd, Caitlin Lanny, Tim Kelly, Thomas Barr, Joy Cervantes, and Ellen Curtin. We couldn't have a better panel. This is just absolutely fantastic today. So with that, let's go ahead and kick it off. I'm going to hand it over to Mark Moeremans, who's been just doing a yeoman's job and working on all of the activities under this boot camp. And Mark, why don't you kick it off, and we'll start to get to some questions.
Sure thing. Good morning, everyone. The best way for us to take some questions for you today is through the Q&A tool at the bottom of your screen. As those come in, we'll start to field those out to our experts, or if you want to leave something in the chat box, we'll be monitoring that as well. But in the meantime, I know that we've had some updates as early as this morning on updates to the PPP announcements. And so Joy, I know we were talking about that. I'm going to stop my screen now if you wanted to kind of share some of the updates that you've heard about that.
Yeah, just released yesterday. Unfortunately, the IRS has made a consistent position where if you get tax-free money, you don't get to take those deductions. So if the PPP loan is forgiven, you won't be able to take the deductions that you've claimed for payroll, wages, rent. So it's going to be interesting how we implement it with the 2-year lag, not knowing when the deductions, you know, they're going to happen over right now and the next few years, but the loan's not going to be forgiven for 2 years. So we'll still have to wait some more guidance on that. So unfortunately, it won't be tax-free, and you get your deductions. So you don't get both.
Joy, this is Robert. Quick question on that is, it's just for those 8 weeks of forgiveness, correct? That the rest of the deductions could be taken for the rest of the year?
I would have to look and see.
Okay.
I believe it's the amount that you get tax-free income.
Gotcha.
And team, I know yesterday we had a really good conversation about how to be tracking kind of expenses as audits might be likely, or as we think about deductions and expenses and things like that. Do you have guidance on how best people can be monitoring that so that when those are due, that they're prepared?
I think Carrie Ann made a really wonderful point yesterday that for bigger businesses, all of your infrastructure is already set up for your payroll company. For smaller businesses, it might not be that way. So, you know, I'm advising clients to open up a separate account for PPP funding so they have record of what they received. And then from that account to fund their payroll and just to make all the infrastructure easy. I know Carrie Ann works with much larger clients that have a lot more employees, so I'm sure she has thoughts on that too.
Carrie Ann, did you want to add to that?
Sure. I think just making sure that you're tracking in your accounting system and separately on some sort of document that you're going to eventually give to your lender the expenses that are eligible for the PPP forgiveness. And so that when we do figure out how it's all going to work with the, what portion of the taxable income is not taxable and what portion of the expenses are not deductible, that you can easily point out to your tax preparer, here's what I spent on these covered costs. Here's where they're recorded in my accounting records. Here's where I put the loan in my accounting records, and just keeping all of that straight so that when it does come time to not only do the forgiveness application, but eventually file your tax return this time next year or whenever that is, that you have all that information ready because your tax preparer is going to be asking those questions this time next year.
Great, thank you. I see we have a hand raised. Cheryl, I'm going to click to allow you to talk if you have a question. Cheryl?
No, I don't think I did. Sorry.
Oh, all right. I will take that back. Sorry. If you do have a question, you can put it in the Q&A box at the bottom. You can type it in the chat, or you can go ahead and raise your hand and I can unmute you. Do any of our other panelists have updates? I know this news comes out kind of day to day. Would love to know what you're hearing, what you're seeing with some of your clients or partners in the community. Anecdotally, we know some of Arizona businesses are starting to get some of their PPP loans approved, but would love to hear kind of what you're seeing.
Mark, this is Tim. I can chime in there. So we received funds from the PPP this week. In fact, this particular business is preschools. So our revenue is down to 0, and we laid off half of our staff, just given the raw timing. It was impossible and made no sense to carry that full staff. We're 65 employees. We remained with 20. And boy, that PPP calculation, the penalty that we get hit with is significant. And by the calculator we used from Paychex, and I don't know if others over the course of the week have shared that particular tool, but their calculator, I mean, my bank didn't have a calculator, but Paychex seems to have one that at the very least is useful. And wow, out of $280,000 in PPP funds received, that calculator says we'll only get forgiven about $65,000. So it's a pretty dramatic penalty that we'll be stuck with having laid off our staff.
Interesting. Thanks, Tim. Bennett, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, I think I heard this morning, and maybe someone heard this also and can comment on it, that the City of Phoenix just provided some additional funding. I think it was like $5 million for small businesses. They had an original allocation of $2 million, and they just, I believe, approved another $5 million. And I believe it was $10,000, up to $10,000 per applicant. Anyone else hear that or have any information on that?
Yeah, that's the grant that the Phoenix IDA is facilitating through the Arizona Community Foundation. They wrapped up their first round of applicants that will start receiving notices of any funding next week. And that additional funding will likely go to build that fund up so that they can fund more applicants or open the application process again, but they haven't advised yet.
Awesome. And we had discussed during our Wednesday session about some of those municipal grants. I know that there was one in Tucson for, they had a small pool of money as well. We are advising companies that those are going to go fast. And so if you do hear about them, get in line, put in your application, because those types of things typically do not last. Do we have any other panelists that have kind of heard updates around any of those municipal grants?
I do. So I sit on the board of National Association of Women Business Owners, and yesterday we launched a website to help start consolidating some of these grant options. So I'm going to put the link into the chat box for everyone to see. We're still all getting caught up on it, but at least it's some place that everybody can go to just get an update on, you know, what's available, what's coming out, and whatnot.
That's great. Thank you, Caitlin. And then again, on Monday of next week, we will be talking about some of these alternative sources of funding, not only municipal grants, but sort of crowdfunding, Kiva loans, things like that. So if you're interested in more topics like that, make sure you come back on Monday as well, because we'll have a few more panelists talking at length about those topics. So Thomas, I would love to kind of pick your brain a little bit more about kind of what you're seeing with local, Arizona Local First, and if you've had any more updates or kind of finger on the pulse of what's going on. Have we run out of PPP funding? Are banks still lending? That sort of thing.
Sure. Yeah. Banks are still lending in Arizona. The pot is not dry. So even if you haven't gotten your application in, go get your application in. Your best luck is probably with a smaller community bank. I heard just yesterday Republic Bank is still processing, Horizon Community Bank is still processing, same as Prestamo CDFI. So if you're waiting in queue, go get it in with somebody else. Try to get that lot of funding as soon as you can. And then we know a lot of businesses are preparing for what was discussed earlier, your financials once you get the funds, what it's going to mean, how to deal with all of that. So I know that there's multiple resources out there on how to calculate that, things like that. So if you don't have a CPA or someone closely connected to you, I would say reach out to Commerce Authority for those resources. There's a lot of them. The other thing we're seeing is some businesses are a little confused or just waiting for more information on what will be required of them to comply with opening if they are a retail business due to the governor's executive order this week. They're wondering, is there any guidance or specific recommendations that we're going to be given regarding spacing issues or keeping doors open or sanitary products? And the simple answer is that the safety is up to the business to regulate themselves. So you are guided by the governor's executive order to maintain safety standards set by the CDC, but there are not going to be any specifics that come out saying you have to do this or you have to do that right now. So I just wanted to clarify that as it's come up a lot the last couple of days.
Great, thanks, Thomas. We had a great question in the chat. I'll read it out, and then whoever wants to kind of grab it. I'm a sole proprietor and the only employee. I've received my PPP and filed Schedule C. What do I provide for documentation to be able to have the loan forgiven?
Mark, I can take that one. So
Yeah,
on the forgiveness side, it's been clarified that for sole proprietors, you're going to receive forgiveness equal to, and of course it's math, 8 50-seconds of your net income from your 2019 Schedule C. So when you go to your lender, you're going to need a copy of your 2019 Schedule C. If you haven't filed your tax return yet, they will at least ask for a draft. But knowing that you have 8 weeks, hopefully that maybe in the next 8 weeks you can get your tax return finalized so you have that Schedule C. So the math for what gets forgiven for you as the sole proprietor is, like I said, 8 divided by 52 times Schedule C line 31. And then that's probably not going to equal the total amount of your loan, because the loan always gives a little bump to cover stuff like rent, utilities, and interest. So if you have rent, utilities, or interest that are qualifying expenses, you can include those as well in your forgiveness application. And you'll just need to provide documentation of those expenses, what they are, and that you paid them during the 8-week covered period to get to the max amount of loan forgiveness.
Awesome, thank you.
Carrie, I had a quick question on that as a sole proprietor myself. I've had other people ask me when it comes to utilities, is a cell phone, mobile phone that maybe a business provides to its salespeople or staff, or as a sole proprietor, my mobile phone is my business phone. Is that classified as a utility? And then the other question is, I did see something in regards to transportation counting as a utility. Can you comment on that?
Yes. So on April 13th, there was a specific interim final rule, and I was just looking through my papers because I have it right here. And the majority of the interim final rule is directed specifically at sole proprietors. And so it's not super long. If you ignore the legal mumbo jumbo at the front and the back, it's probably about 12 pages. And it's written pretty well, and you can get it from the Treasury website. I'll post that link after I'm done here. But in this document, it focused really and was very clear on what a sole proprietor can use in terms of filing their application in the first place. And then it also clarified on some stuff on the forgiveness side, not as much as we wanted, but it did clarify on the forgiveness side that a sole proprietor, if they have employees, can include certain employee costs. But if they don't have an employee, then it did say that any expense you claim for forgiveness needs to be something that you would have claimed on your Schedule C to begin with. So for example, if you've never claimed utilities on your Schedule C as a business cost, they're not eligible as costs for forgiveness on the back end. And so that's in here specifically. So as far as what the utilities are, they've never really clarified telephone, but I would think it's a little ridiculous to think that you can't include your cell phone, since most people only have a cell phone. I mean, I only have a cell phone. I don't even have a landline anymore. So I think cell phones are eligible if it's something that you've claimed as an expense on your Schedule C previously. And then the transportation cost, it didn't get super specific about that. It says, and business utility payments, for example, the cost of electricity in the warehouse you rent or gas you use driving your business vehicle. And then the next sentence is kind of what I've been talking about. It says you must have claimed or be entitled to claim a deduction for such expenses on your 2019 Form Schedule C for them to be permissible to use during the 8-week period, blah, blah, blah. So if you are a sole proprietor, this is a pretty good resource on kind of what the rules that are for you. And like I said, it's not really written high level, it's written very conversational.
Thanks. A few more questions coming in. What is the time frame of the 8-week period being measured?
So the 8 weeks starts the day you receive your funding. And
Correct,
receipt meaning the day it hits your bank account. So that's the day you start, and then it's that day and then 56 days beyond that.
Great, thank you. We've got a question about EIDL now. So I'm a small business owner, but we don't qualify for PPP. We've applied for an EIDL before the first round of PPP applications were accepted. We've received no communication on the status of our application. Should we apply again? And for whoever wants to take this on, if you could speak a little bit more about where EIDL is currently, and if we've heard anything about those EIDL loans. I know we had some questions on that yesterday.
So with the EIDL loan, oh, Caitlin, did you want to handle that?
Go for it. I can add. I can tack on at the end.
Okay. So with the EIDL loans, we all know that the process has been slow and there were millions of applications. If you filled out the application where you included your bank account number, which was the shorter application, included the advance option. If you receive the advance, then you should hopefully, before too long, be receiving information from the loan officer at the SBA. We're hearing a lot of feedback, at least I am, that this is slow going on both sides from businesses waiting to hear back. But the SBA is using the second round of funds to help work through their current queue of applications.
Yeah, and just to add to Rob, do you go by Robert or Bob?
Both. So
okay.
Either.
So just to add to Bob's point, I had business owners apply in the very beginning where they hadn't quite added the bank information yet. Those business owners, for the most part, have received their $10,000 grant, but are still waiting for their full loan approval. I have other business owners that applied once they had updated the application form with the bank account information. Some have received their $10,000 grant and others haven't. From what I can tell, there's no rhyme or reason for who has and who hasn't. It's just a matter of when they're getting to you. So I would say, I don't know that applying again makes sense, but there is a 1-800 number that you can call to check on the status of your application. I'm hoping that the funds hit with, at the beginning of next week. So that would be the ideal time frame.
I'll post that. I'll post that 1-800 number in the chat box as well.
Caitlin, are you familiar with the change in that $10,000 grant or loan to where it changed to $1,000 per employee? Is that correct?
I did see that change, and originally the SBA came out and said that the $10,000 grant was only going to be forgivable if you had 10 employees or more. They have since, my understanding, has rolled that back. So, that's what I know at this point. I would lean on the CPAs on, their insight into what is and isn't forgivable on that front.
And one of the keys with that grant that I've focused on this since it came out is they never said it was $10,000. It always said up to $10,000. And a lot of people in the media, everywhere else, missed the up to part of that and just started saying $10,000.
You're absolutely right. And that is a really good point.
Something that we spoke about yesterday as we talk about kind of forgiveness and these other things is people are very focused on the forgiveness piece, and we're going to start talking next week about kind of cash flow and cash is king. But even if you're using that money for non-forgivable expenses, we talked about the idea of having a 1% loan over the next 22 or 24 months and how that might be beneficial in and of itself for a business, given the uncertainty of the next several months. So I was wondering if we could talk a little bit more about that for people that might just be joining today that weren't on yesterday, kind of the benefits of having access to that, even if it's not forgivable, even if they didn't think they needed it. If I don't know who wants to kind of jump in on that.
I'll jump in really quick because I think there's a lot of confusion right now around what's what. And so there's really two types of loans that we're talking about for everybody on the call. There's the Paycheck Protection Program that is brand new that came out of the CARES Act. The deferment on that loan is 6 months, and it's capped at basically 2.5 times your average monthly payroll. So most business owners are going to have a lot more expenses to cover than 8 weeks of payroll, right? So the other option is the second loan, which is the economic injury disaster loan that we were talking about with the $10,000 grant. The deferment on that loan is up to 1 year. So that loan is not forgivable, but the interest rate is very, very low. The maximum interest rate is 4%. Most business owners that have been approved that I work with are getting about 3.25. So it's still a very low interest rate. It's way better than putting money on credit cards or pulling money out of retirement accounts where you're going to be taxed. And so if I'm encouraging business owners to apply for both if possible and if they qualify. So I think those are some differentiators. And the economic injury disaster loan limit is up to $2 million. So you can get a lot more money potentially for your business.
I have a question to ask as well. Caitlin, you seem to be the expert on all accounting issues. So are they the 8-week period for the PPP in which you can take expenses for payroll and rent and et cetera? Is it amounts paid during that period or accrued during that period?
So I am a humble certified financial planner, so I will defer to the CPAs for that question.
So as soon as the SBA tells us what the answer is, I'd be happy to let you know.
Yeah.
No, there's no clarification on that question yet. You're right.
Wow. Yeah, I think that when you realize the amounts that are going to have to be paid back, this is future profits that are literally being spent now, and in many cases, like our case, in a situation in which we're generating zero revenue. Okay, so what value does this truly build? So we'll see.
So another question that we've started to get, so this past week within the boot camp and across the state, I'm sure all of you have been hearing a lot about kind of PPP, EIDL, trying to get the application in. It sounds like some of those kinks are getting worked out. Thomas mentioned there's still money in the pot if you need to apply. I think people are starting to think, now what? What happens next? Whether you've gotten your loan approved, whether the funds have hit your bank, or you've realized that you're not qualified, you're not kind of eligible. Regardless of those things, within the boot camp, I know we're starting to kind of think about, okay, what comes after this immediate response? And I'd love to hear from the panel here. Once you get those funds, or once you kind of get that figured out, where are businesses going next, or what's the next thing that they need to have their eyes on?
So I have a couple thoughts. I would say, number one, there's a number of people that have applied for the PPP loan that haven't heard anything. And they're deciding on, okay, do I apply again? So I would say the number one advice I would give business owners right now is to contact your bank and ask for the submission loan application number. If you've been given that number, that means your funds are on the way. They just haven't been distributed. And that's the submission of loan application number. If you don't have the number, then that means you definitely need to apply again. And I would reach out to your network, family, friends, around who are the personal banks that you know. Feel free to reach out to me directly. I have 3 individuals that are taking my clients' calls at 5 in the morning, 10 o'clock at night. So we do have resources for people that are trying to apply. The other piece of advice I would give is applying for a line of credit. You know, business lines of credit are not ideal, but you know, if you need a bridge loan to float you, you know, to Tim's point, this is revenue that many business owners will never get back. We'll never get the time back. So how can we put a Band-Aid just to get us over this hump so we can open our doors in 2 or 3 weeks? A line of credit is definitely going to be the fastest way to get capital into your business.
Yeah, I would just add to that, Mark, that really, you know, once you get, you know, let's say you've gotten the PPP loan and you're in this 8-week process, but revenue, similar to what Tim was mentioning, revenue's not coming in. So I think it's critical during this period of businesses not being open or slow business times is to really identify, you know, your costs and what your costs are. Dealing with, you know, whether it's landlord and rent payments. I know that a lot of utility companies are working with customers. I would guess that once business starts back up again, vendors that you may work with, a business may work with for inventory, you know, to really go to those vendors and try to work out some kind of arrangement where you could bring inventory in to be able to sell. Maybe it's on an advance type of structure, but really it's a time to be proactive and creative and really think outside of the box of who can I go to, what resources can I go to, you know, for my inventory, for sales and marketing, types of things like that. How can I make adjustments in my business past this whole paycheck protection, getting money? Do I pay it back? Do I not pay it back? It's really about, all right, how do I restart my business?
Thanks, Bennett. I love that. We're going to have, I mean, one, you're like an advertisement for our sessions. Next week on Tuesday, we're talking about how to have conversations with your landlord and your utilities providers to help negotiate some of that relief. And so on Tuesday, we'll be talking about tactics for that. And then something else that we talked about this week that I really loved was this idea of you're still a business. And so even though these are crazy times and maybe you can't sell what you normally sell, you need to be kind of creative, adaptive, and flexible to figure out new and innovative ways to bring that cash flow forward. And so if you do go to our website where we've posted our webinars from this week, and we'll continue to do so, Tuesday's session was around all of these kind of creative pivots to still find ways to sell something. We've got restaurants that are selling kind of flour because you can't find it in the store. We've got farms that are setting up drive-in theaters. So these are great things that you can be thinking about as you look to the next phase of this and kind of just making sure that you continue to stay in business. Carry on, sorry, go ahead.
Just to add to that, you know, I think right now is the time to be as innovative as possible. Just a friendly reminder for businesses that are venturing into different industries or different scopes. It's really important that you call your property and casualty broker to do an insurance audit to make sure that you're covered and to make sure that if something happens from a liability standpoint, that your policies are all updated. The last thing you would want is you are a beer manufacturer and you're making hand sanitizer and you get sued for hand sanitizer and your policies aren't going to cover you. So I just want to make sure that as you're thinking about business risk, it's not just about money, it's about all the different verticals there.
Awesome. Thank you, Caitlin. And then Carrie Ann wanted to talk about employee retention credit. Go ahead, Carrie Ann.
Okay. So for an individual business that does not receive a PPP loan, there's other stuff that you can take advantage of. So I just posted in the chat box a link to a summary of the employee retention credit that's on our website. And essentially what it is for businesses who have less than 100 employees, which I think everyone on this call falls into that category, you can take a credit on your Form 941 or the 943, whatever you pay your FICA and Medicare taxes with. You can take a credit up to $5,000. Let's see. Yeah. The maximum qualified wages per employee is $10,000 and the maximum credit is $5,000. So it's a 50% of wages credit against payroll taxes. And so for a small business, even with just a few employees, that can add up really quickly. So I would recommend that you check out that link and read about that if you do not get a PPP loan, because it's honestly the next best thing. And then there is a question about forgiveness on the question thing. It says, I already received my PPP and EIDL. How to when do I need to apply for forgiveness? The forgiveness is going to be managed by the lender, and the lender will handle that process. And that will start after your 8-week covered period.
And so just to add to Carrie Ann's fantastic point about the employee retention credit, I was on a call last week with a business owner trying to decide what comes next, to Mark's earlier question around, okay, we're strapped for cash, we're in a similar position as Tim's college or preschool. If we're going to have to lay off employees, let's start with our part-time workers. And so I just want to remind people that Arizona is very strict rules for who can qualify for unemployment. And my understanding, and feel free to jump in if anybody is more versed in this, is you have to have worked at least 25 hours a week, which is closer to a full-time employee. So with regards to beefed up unemployment, if you're trying to decide who to keep on and what to do, one, this credit, it can be a fantastic resource. But also think about your employees right now. Your full-time employees might even be making more money on unemployment than by keeping you on salary, you keeping them on salary, which is a great option for business owners.
Thanks, Caitlin. Thanks, Carrie Ann. And both of those comments kind of fall into another question that's in here. If we've already answered it, that's fine. But I just want to kind of check the room and see if there are other arrangements for people that don't necessarily qualify for PPP, that feel like they might be falling through the cracks because they've got a Schedule E, not a Schedule C. So in addition to employee retention credit, are there other programs available for people that are kind of come to mind and they should know about?
Carrie, was there something that I had read in regards to for self-employed individuals who pay, the Social Security at 15% plus or minus, whatever that number is? Is there a deferment on half of that Social Security FICA that a Schedule C person would file? Are you familiar with that?
That's a really good question. I'm trying to look and see if our website. I'm not an expert on the retention credit or the deferment. I'm kind of aware of them, but I've been focused on the PPP. Joy, do you happen to know offhand?
I'm looking at it as well. I mean, it does say that you can defer the FICA portion of the employer's share, but it doesn't specifically address self-employed.
My understanding is up to $10,000 per employee. So if you're self-employed and you're employee one, I believe it's up to that. So that would be my non-CPA understanding.
To participants on the line, in addition to asking questions kind of through the chat or the Q&A function, we're also interested in feedback on the types of topics that you're looking forward to going forward. And so as we start to think about, okay, what happens after PPP? What happens once I've got my cash situation under control? We're very open and excited to hear from you about the types of things that you want to be learning more about over the next few weeks. And so whether that's setting up an e-commerce site, what's changing your business delivery model, or working with a financial planner, let us know so that we can start to cater the content towards what's most pressing for each of you. In the meantime, another question that I know has come up a lot that I figured I'd ask this crew is, there was a lot of confusion for a long time whether or not you could apply to more than one bank for the PPP. Some people weren't hearing, they were afraid to go to a second bank in case that led to kind of fraud claims, but I understand that there's more clarity around that now. So if one of you would like to speak to that.
Yeah, I would just mention that, so I've had a couple of people that I've worked with who have applied to different banks. They originally applied to the large banks, and we're not getting any traction, so they left their name in the pipeline, so to say, with those large banks, went to a smaller bank, got uploaded to the SBA and received an SBA number. And so the process would be to then notify the other bank very quickly that you have been given an SBA number, SBA loan, because it all tracks to your tax ID number, your EIN number. So what you don't want to have happen, of course, is have two uploads to the SBA. You can apply at 2 different banks, just as long as once you receive notification that Bank A has submitted your application to the SBA and is awaiting the SBA number, you should notify Bank B to take your name off of their list. So there is not a duplicate application into the SBA.
And just to add to that, so one of the questions when you apply for the PPP is, have you already applied at a different bank? So in the beginning, there was a lot of concern of saying, if you have to check yes in that box, that it's going to send you to the back of the line or potentially jeopardize your funds. I sit on the board of WHEAT, which is a nonprofit here in Phoenix. They did apply to 3 different banks and have received their PPP funding. So that's a personal experience I have that did go through. Bankers that I know in my network are still saying don't apply at multiple banks. So I think there's still some confusion around what's right. And I would say at this point you have to trust your banking relationship. But to Bennett's point, people are having much more success with the smaller local banks.
Great, thanks everyone. And just so people see in the chat window, I posted a link to where you can register for next week's sessions as well. Feel free to share that with people in your network. Those are for the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, but we'll be sending out more emails starting today with additional information for next week's sessions, including next week's office hours. So any more questions or any more topics that our panelists wanted to make sure that they shared with the group? If people have their questions answered, we don't need to keep them on the line, but want to make sure that everyone has a chance to kind of hear what they need to.
I would just mention, it may not be as appropriate for this group, but kind of to be aware of it, is that I think we talked yesterday a little bit about one of the other programs called Main Street Lending Program, which is part of the CARES Act also. They just recently, there's been some new information on that. That was a loan that started at $1 million and went up to, I believe, $25 million. And it went up to 10,000 employees. That's just been reduced to $500,000 from a minimum of $1 million to a minimum of $500,000. So I would, as another resource for potentially larger companies that the PPP loan, provides a little bit of runway, but they need additional runway. I would contact your bank in regards to this Main Street Lending Program. And again, that minimum loan size went down from 1 million to 500,000. And it is repaid back over a 4-year period. I think the first 12 months payments are deferred, and then you pay that back over the next 3 years. And again, it's a low interest rate loan. And there's no minimum number of employees. So you could have, 100 employees. And again, I believe it's up to 10,000. Actually, I think that was increased to 15,000 employees. But again, another resource for maybe more mid-sized type of companies.
Great, thank you, Bennett. Super helpful. Any other pressing topics, last minute things that you want to make sure our businesses are thinking about, or business owners on the line, if you have any last minute questions? Great. Well, thank you for all attending. I hope to see your names next week in our sessions. Again, that link to register is in the chat box for next week. Really appreciate our panelists, really great information, and hope to have you back as our topics continue and we move into kind of the planning for the future mode. So thank you, everyone. Be sure to check out all the websites of our partners on this call, as well as the ACA website. And if you have any questions, just go ahead and email us. I'll leave this open so that if people want to share things in the chat, you can go ahead and do that. But otherwise, I will plan to see you on Monday. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Andy. Thank you all.
Thank
Have
you,
a great
everyone.
weekend.